You mean when they sent us a press release?
Good evening, everybody. Happy Friday. We all did make it in. Boy, if you were watching the stream a little bit earlier, we started not the 6:30, but we had a 5:15 breaking news situation where there was a police chase. And just in case you weren't watching that, we will show you this police chase in its entirety. It was something to see. It all ended up at 19th Avenue and Bethany Home. So we're going to show you that right now, just in case you weren't watching back then. Here you go. So this was the police chase. Good evening, everybody. Thank you all for watching. Appreciate it. And you could see in the beginning that it didn't look like it was a high rate of speed. And with this shot that you're seeing, you really didn't see any police cruisers behind. You know, they kept their distance because they didn't want the person, obviously, to do anything erratic, as sometimes the situations do happen. Let me just move that here for you so you get a better shot of that. There we go. And then you thought, well, maybe he's stopping. No, he's like, I thought a little bit better about that. I'm going to keep trying. He's just at a red light. He's like, well, this is sort of awkward. Stuck at a red light during a police chase. Haven't you? Now we've seen it all. Look at. There he goes back as a green light approaches. Yes, there will be no Kinsey tonight. I am Mike Paish. I'll be with you until about 9 o'clock. We're going to have some fun today. My motto is let's have a good day and a better night. So we're going to have a better night right now. And this happened about 5:15. If you guys were watching the stream, and many of you were, I thank you all for that as we showcase this to you, as we like to do on News Now, anytime there's a real breaking news situation. And this just so happened to be in the Valley as well. I see you guys all saying hi. I will start chatting pretty soon with you guys in there in the chat room, but I want to do a little play-by-play here for you of this police chase that happened about 5:15. Just about an hour ago, and we do have an update for you for everyone that was watching earlier and right now. The update is Phoenix police say they have one suspect in custody. 2 others are still outstanding. They will be updating us through the night on what their investigation shows us. And there you go. They parked the car. First off, they parked the car and then went right into this mall here, right into the main entry. And Phoenix police say they were supposed burglary suspects that they were following, and that's how the police chase ensued. And then this is how it all wrapped up. Right now they have one suspect in custody, 2 others outstanding right now. When we get more news throughout the evening, if we do, of course, we will bring that news to you. But that was the police chase that happened earlier today. And we appreciate everybody watching that live stream. That was part of a Fox 10 breaking news situation. And that was the scene just about an hour ago. All right, we will be switching gears now. I just wanted to update you guys with that information. So Phoenix police saying 1 suspect in custody, 2 others outstanding. Wow, what a way to start our Friday broadcast on here on News Now. I appreciate everybody watching, and we got some just some sad updates with this Oregon shooting spree that happened yesterday, and just always sad when we have to report these things. I know you guys don't like to hear them, but you know, it's a story that has gripped the nation once again. And just about an hour and a half ago, they released the names of the victims, and I think it's better that we showcase the victims because, you know, they're the ones that need to get the coverage now for stories, because we need to tell their stories now because of this just horrible situation that happened in Oregon yesterday. And I have video of them announcing the names of the victims, and some we hear a little bit of stories about these victims. So I am going to showcase that to you now. Just give me a second here as I bring up the video. Okay, we have that ready for you. Here we go. This happened about an hour and a half ago. Douglas County Sheriff's Office announcing the victims for the first time of the Oregon shooting tragedy.
Glenn Cooper. The victims are Lucero Alcarez of Roseburg, 19 years old. Quinn Glenn Cooper of Roseburg, 18 years old. Kim Saltmarsh Dietz of Roseburg, 59 years old. Lucas Eibel of Roseburg, 18 years old. Jason Dale Johnson of Winston, 33 years old. Lawrence Levine of Glide, 67 years old. Mr. Levine was the teacher. Serena Dawn Moore of Myrtle Creek, 44 years old. Trevin Taylor Onpak of Sutherland, 20 years old. And Rebecca Ann Carnes of Myrtle Creek, 18 years old. At this time, I'd like to introduce Fire Chief Greg Marler of Fire District Number 2, who would like to make a few comments regarding 2 of our victims. Chief?
Thank you, Sheriff. It saddens me to announce that 2 of these victims were actually members of our immediate fire and EMS family. Obviously, we are family, and this hurts. This situation is personal to us, and we share in the pain that this community is feeling right now. But I want to let everyone know our service and our response will not be affected in the light of this tragedy. We're working actively with law enforcement in their investigation, and then we ask that all questions be forwarded through their public office. I have some remarks from the family. The Anspaugh family, for Trevin Anspaugh, would like us to thank everybody for their heartfelt thoughts and prayers during this difficult time. Trevin was one of the most positive young men, always looking for the best in life. Trevin was larger than life and brought out the best in those around him. In Justin and Kim's words, Trevin was a perfect son. Thank you.
We have a few more family statements that we would like to read. And so I will start with Sergeant Boyd from the Oregon State Police, who will read a statement from the Eibel family.
This statement is from the Lucas Eibel family. We have been trying to figure out how to tell everyone how amazing Lucas was, but that would take 18 years. Lucas loved Future Farmers of America, volunteering at Wildlife Safari, and Saving Grace Animal Shelter. He was an amazing soccer player. He graduated Roseburg High School with high academic marks. He was a Ford Family Foundation Scholarship recipient. He was an Umpqua Community College Scholars Award recipient. He was studying chemistry. Memorial donations can be made to Roseburg High School FFA and to the injured victims.
I will now read a statement from Jason Johnson's family. The statement reads, Jason Johnson, age 34, was proud to be a Christian. Jason recently enrolled in school at Umpqua Community College. Jason's mother said that Jason was proud of himself for enrolling in the school, and so was his mother. They felt that Jason had finally found his path. His family says that he will be loved and missed. And now I will ask Sergeant Boyd again to come up and read a statement from the Cooper family.
I will read a portion of the Quinn Cooper family statement. We are shocked this has happened. Quinn was only 18 years old. He had just graduated from Roseburg High School in June. Yesterday was his 4th day of college. Quinn was funny, sweet, compassionate, and such a wonderful, loving person. He always stood up for people. Quinn and his brother Cody were inseparable. Quinn was going to take his brown belt test on October 10th. He loved dancing, voice acting, and playing ingress with Cody. I don't know how we're going to move forward with our lives without Quinn. Our lives are shattered beyond repair. We send our condolences to all the families who have been so tragically affected by the strange gunman. No one should ever feel the pain that we are feeling.
We know that the media are interested in speaking with the families, and we understand that. We are working very closely with them to arrange the release of these statements and photos. If they wish to do interviews, we will arrange those opportunities for them as well. At this time, all of the families are asking for privacy.
All right, and that was the update from the Douglas County Sheriff's Office, and boy, just what a sad story it was there. You hear one of the suspects, it was only their 4th day of college. Such a sad and really just senseless act that did occur yesterday, and now many families are forever destroyed because of this really just a cowardly act that happened in Oregon yesterday. We will be showing you the shooter's apartment complex where he lived and a little sound from neighbors. That is coming up. I know a lot of you are just very touched by this story, and it's just a sad, senseless story that you really can't ever grasp why someone would do this. There's always so many questions that happen because of these just really senseless crimes, and the only real question that you ask yourself is why? It's so sad, and it's just another day and just another reason why everyone should really appreciate life every day, because you never know when something stupid like this is going to happen. We are going to show you now. Before we do show you the shooter's apartment, we do have pictures of the 3 victims. And if that would play for us, that would be great. Let's see, it might not. I don't know where it's playing. Let's look. Let me see, can I pull up anything? Hold on one second, I want to get this going for you guys. Just hold on one second. Having a little video playback issue. And here we go. I'm going to get that back going for you. Here is the shooter's apartment.
Yeah, like it goes through your mind not knowing who exactly was hurt, but we have a clear idea that all the people that we're really close to are safe.
So when did you find out? How did you find out?
Our teammate texted us and was like, everybody let us know who's okay.
Are you nervous to go back to school?
Yes.
Yeah, like the whole place is shut, like closed off right now. No one can get in.
But I mean, if you could go back, would you want to right now?
It'll be interesting to see the campus again, knowing what happened.
Had you ever seen this gunman before?
No.
So when you saw his picture, that was the first time you ever saw him?
Yes.
Like it was scary when you first heard about the shooting. Like obviously that's your school, your community. But it's different when you find out that he lived next door to you. Like
You don't feel safe at all.
It's not the same.
Just trying to play that for you, but it looks like it's like a 1-second clip here. And we won't be able to show you those pictures, but just a very, very sad story to report to you. And as the weekend takes more shape, of course, we're going to be hearing more of these stories as reporters will, if the families are okay with it, will share their loved ones' favorite things to do and special stories from the loved ones. So that will be special. We do have breaking news happening right now. I am going to just go back to the weather here for a second as I gather some details, and we will be bringing you Sky Fox aerials. All right, no details right now with that situation that Sky Fox did show us. Going back, though, to Oregon, it's just, I'm looking forward to really hearing some of the victims' stories from the family members and loved ones. It's a weird situation because you would think that, like, reporters are trying to hound at the families, and it's really the opposite because a lot of the times the families do want to talk about their loved ones. It's probably the one time where they can really, showcase what their loved one was all about. And it's a really, I think, a good way for them to begin the healing process. I know it hasn't even begun for these families, but just sometimes to really talk about their loved ones. I was a reporter out in South Bend in Missouri, and I covered a lot of deaths with family members, and it's the weirdest thing. You would think going up to the family, you'd be like, they do not want to talk. That's the last thing. But they really do want to talk and really share the story of their loved ones. So I'll be looking forward to seeing some of those over the weekend, and of course we will bring those to you starting on Monday if those happen over the weekend, which I think will happen. Okay, moving and shifting gears. Earlier today, President Obama had some remarks on the situation once again, and he's advocating now for stricter gun laws. We will get into the discussion on here, but I did want to showcase his press conference, and he also talks about the economy. So first it's going to be about the economy, then it's reporters are going to grill him on the Oregon tragic events there. So we're going to go to President Obama earlier today talking about the economy, and I really want to have a discussion about how the job situation is that you see right now in your life with family and friends. So we're going to get to that.
Please be seated, everybody. Good afternoon.
Very personal. For me, it's very about.
We can't fund our country the way we did 10 years ago because we have greater demands with an aging population, with kids who need schools, with roads that need to be fixed, with a military on which we are placing extraordinary demands. And we can't cut our way to prosperity. Other countries have tried it, and it has not worked. We've grown faster than they have because we did not pursue these blind, unthinking cuts to necessary investments for our growth. And by the way, because we've grown faster than them, we've brought our deficits down faster than they have. I want to repeat this because the public apparently never believes it. Since I took office, we've cut our deficits by 2/3. The deficit has not been going up. It has been coming down precipitously. We've cut our deficits by 2/3. They're below the average deficits over the past 40 years. So the bottom line is Congress has to do its job. It can't flirt with another shutdown. It should pass a serious budget. And if they do, and get rid of some of these mindless cuts, even as we're still prudent about maintaining the spending that we need, but not spending we don't need, and it's not working, their own nonpartisan budget office estimates we're going to add an extra 500,000 jobs to our economy next year alone. We can immediately put 500,000 more people back to work if we just have a more sensible budget. And in these negotiations, nobody's going to get everything they want. We have to work together, though, even if we disagree, in order to do the people's business. At some point, we have to want to govern and not just play politics or play to various political bases. At some point, we need to pass bills so that we can rebuild our roads and keep our kids learning and keep our military strong and help people prepare for and recover from disasters. That is Congress's most basic job. That's what our government is supposed to do, serve the American people. So, with that, let me take some questions, and I'll start with Julie Pace of AP. Hang in there, kids.
It'll be over soon. Thank you, Mr. President. There have been several developments in Syria that I wanted to ask you about, starting with Russia's involvement. You met with President Putin earlier this week, and I wonder if you think he was honest with you about his intentions in Syria. If Russia is targeting groups beyond the Islamic State, including U.S.-aligned groups, does the U.S. military have an obligation to protect them? And on the situation in Syria more broadly, there have obviously been failures in the U.S. Train and Equip program. Do you believe that that program can be fixed, or do you have to look at other options? Would you in particular be willing to reconsider a no-fly zone, which several presidential candidates, including your former Secretary of State, are now calling for?
Well, first and foremost, let's understand what's happening in Syria and how we got here. What started off as peaceful protests against Assad, the president, evolved into a civil war because Assad met those protests with unimaginable brutality. And so this is not a conflict between the United States and any party in Syria. This is a conflict between the Syrian people and a brutal, ruthless dictator. Point number two is that the reason Assad is still in power is because Russia and Iran have supported him throughout this process. And in that sense, what Russia is doing now is not particularly different from what they had been doing in the past. They're just more overt about it. They've been propping up a regime that is rejected by an overwhelming majority of the Syrian population, because they've seen that he has been willing to drop barrel bombs on children and on villages indiscriminately, and has been more concerned about clinging to power than the state of his country. So in my discussions with President Putin, I was very clear that the only way to solve the problem in Syria is to have a political transition that is inclusive, that keeps the state intact, that keeps the military intact, that maintains cohesion, but that is inclusive, and the only way to accomplish that is for Mr. Assad to transition, because you cannot rehabilitate him in the eyes of Syrians. This is not a judgment I'm making. It is judgment that the overwhelming majority of Syrians make. And I said to Mr. Putin that I would be prepared to work with him if he is willing to broker with his partners, Mr. Assad and Iran, a political transition. We can bring the rest of the world community to a brokered solution, but that a military solution alone, an attempt by Russia and Iran to prop up Assad and try to pacify the population, is just going to get them stuck in a quagmire. And it won't work. And they will be there for a while if they don't take a different course. I also said to him that it is true that the United States and Russia and the entire world have a common interest in destroying ISIL. But what was very clear, and regardless of what Mr. Putin said, was that he doesn't distinguish between ISIL and a moderate Sunni opposition that wants to see Mr. Assad go. From their perspective, they're all terrorists. And that's a recipe for disaster, and it's one that I reject. So where we are now is that we are having technical conversations about deconfliction so that we're not seeing U.S. and American firefights in the air. But beyond that, we're very clear in sticking to our belief and our policy that the problem here is Assad and the brutality that he's inflicted on the Syrian people, and that it has to stop. And in order for it to stop, we're prepared to work with all the parties concerned, but we are not going to cooperate with a Russian campaign to simply try to destroy anybody who is disgusted and fed up with Mr. Assad's behavior. Keep in mind also from a practical perspective, the moderate opposition in Syria is one that, if we're ever going to have a political transition, we need. And the Russian policy is driving those folks underground or creating a situation in which they are decapacitated, and it's only strengthening ISIL. And that's not good for anybody. In terms of our support of opposition groups inside of Syria, I made very clear early on that the United States couldn't impose a military solution on Syria either, but that it was in our interest to make sure that we were engaged with moderate opposition inside of Syria, because eventually Syria will fall. The Assad regime will fall. And we have to have somebody who we're working with that we can help pick up the pieces and stitch back together a cohesive, coherent country. And so we will continue to support them. The Training and Equip program was a specific initiative by the Defense Department to see if we could get some of that moderate opposition to focus attention on ISIL in the eastern portion of the country. And I'm the first one to acknowledge it has not worked the way it was supposed to, Julie. And I think that the Department of Defense would say the same thing. And part of the reason, frankly, is because when we tried to get them to just focus on ISIL, the response we'd get back is, how can we focus on ISIL when every single day we're having barrel bombs and attacks from the regime? And so it's been hard to get them to reprioritize looking east when they've got bombs coming at them from the west. So what we're doing with the Train and Equip is looking at where we have had success, for example, working with some of the Kurdish community in the east that pushed ISIL out, seeing if we can build on that. But what we're also going to continue to do is to have contacts with and work with opposition that rightly believes, in the absence of some change in government inside of Syria, we're going to continue to see civil war, and that is going to turbocharge ISIL recruitment and jihadist recruitment, and we're going to continue to have problems. Now, last point I just want to make about this, because sometimes the conversation here in the Beltway differs from the conversation internationally. Mr. Putin had to go into Syria not out of strength but out of weakness, because his client, Mr. Assad, was crumbling, and it was insufficient for him simply to send them arms and money. Now he's got to put in his own planes and his own pilots. And the notion that he put forward a plan and that somehow the international community sees that as viable because there's a vacuum there. I didn't see, after he made that speech in the United Nations, suddenly the 60-nation coalition that we have start lining up behind him. Iran and Assad make up Mr. Putin's coalition at the moment. The rest of the world makes up ours. So I don't think people are fooled by the current strategy. It does not mean that we could not see Mr. Putin begin to recognize that it is in their interests to broker a political settlement. And as I said in New York, we're prepared to work with the Russians and the Iranians, as well as our partners who are part of the anti-ISIL coalition, to come up with that political transition. And nobody pretends that it's going to be easy, but I think it is still possible. And so we will maintain lines of communication, but we are not going to be able to get those negotiations going if there's not a recognition that there's got to be a change in government. We're not going to go back to the status quo ante. And the kinds of airstrikes against moderate opposition that Russia is engaging in is going to be counterproductive. It's going to move us farther away rather than towards the ultimate solution that we all should be looking for. Yeah, Julie, throughout this process, I think people have constantly looked for a easy, low-cost answer. Right? Whether it's we should have sent more rifles in early and somehow then everything would have been okay. Or if I had taken that shot even after Assad offered to give up his chemical weapons, then immediately things would have folded, or the Assad regime would have folded, and we would have suddenly seen a peaceful Syria. This is a hugely difficult, complex problem, and I would have hoped that we would have learned that from Afghanistan and Iraq, where we have devoted enormous time and effort and resources with the very best people and have given the Afghan people and the Iraqi people an opportunity for democracy, but it's still hard, as we saw this week in Afghanistan. That's not by virtue of a lack of effort on our part or a lack of commitment. We've still got 10,000 folks in Afghanistan. We're still spending billions of dollars supporting that government, and it's still tough. So when I make a decision about the level of military involvement that we're prepared to engage in Syria, I have to make a judgment based on, once we start something, we got to finish it. And we've got to do it well. And do we, in fact, have the resources and the capacity to make a serious impact, understanding that we've still got to go after ISIL in Iraq. We still have to support the training of an Iraqi military that is weaker than any of us perceived, that we still have business to do in Afghanistan. And so I push and have consistently, over the last 4 or 5 years, sought out a wide range of opinions about steps that we can take potentially to move Syria in a better direction. I am under no illusions about what an incredible humanitarian catastrophe this is, and the hardships that we're seeing, and the refugees that are traveling in very dangerous circumstances, and now creating real political problems among our allies in Europe, and the heartbreaking images of children drowned trying to escape war, and the potential impact of such a destabilized country on our allies in the region. But what we have learned over the last 10, 12, 13 years is that unless we can get the parties on the ground to agree to live together in some fashion, then no amount of U.S. military engagement will solve the problem. And we will find ourselves either doing just a little bit and not making a difference and losing credibility that way, or finding ourselves drawn in deeper and deeper into a situation that we can't sustain. And when I hear people offering up half-baked ideas as if they are solutions, or trying to downplay the challenges involved in the situation, what I'd like to see people ask is specifically, precisely, what exactly would you do, and how would you fund it, and how would you sustain it, And typically, what you get is a bunch of mumbo jumbo. So these are hard challenges. They are ones that we are going to continue to pursue. The top line message that I want everybody to understand is we are going to continue to go after ISIL. We are going to continue to reach out to a moderate opposition. We reject Russia's theory that everybody opposed to Assad is a terrorist. We think that is self-defeating. It will get them into a quagmire. It will be used as a further recruitment tool for foreign fighters. We will work with the international community and our coalition to relieve the humanitarian pressure on refugees. We are working with the Turks and others to see what we can do along the border to make things safer for people. But ultimately, we're going to have to find a way for a political transition if we're going to solve Syria. Okay. John Carl.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Yeah.
Back in July, you said that the gun issue has been the most frustrating of your presidency, and we certainly heard that frustration from you last night.
Yep.
So in the last 15 months of your presidency, do you intend to do anything differently to get Congress to act or to do something about this gun violence problem? And I have to get you to respond to something that Jeb Bush just said. Mm-hmm. And to be fair to Governor Bush, I want to read it directly. Okay. Asked about the drive to take action in light of what happened in Oregon. He said, look, stuff happens. There's always a crisis, and the impulse is always to do something, and it's not always the right thing to do. How would you react to Governor Bush?
I don't even think I have to react to that one. I think the American people should hear that and make their own judgments based on the fact that every couple of months we have a mass shooting. And in terms of, and they can decide whether they consider that stuff happening. In terms of what I can do, I've asked my team, as I have in the past, to scrub what kinds of authorities do we have to enforce the laws that we have in place more effectively to keep guns out of the hands of criminals? Are there additional actions that we can take that might prevent even a handful of these tragic deaths from taking place? But, as I said last night, this will not change until the politics changes and the behavior of elected officials changes. And so the main thing I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about this on a regular basis. And I will politicize it because our inaction is a political decision that we are making. The reason that Congress does not support even the modest gun safety laws that we proposed after Sandy Hook is not because the majority of the American people don't support it. I mean, normally, politicians are responsive to the views of the electorate. Here you've got majority of the American people think it's the right thing to do. Background checks, other common sense steps that would maybe save some lives. Couldn't even get a full vote. And why is that? It's because of politics. It's because interest groups fund campaigns, feed people fear, and in fairness, it's not just in the Republican Party, although the Republican Party is just uniformly opposed to all gun safety laws. And unless we change that political dynamic, we're not going to be able to make a big dent in this problem. For example, you'll hear people talk about the problem's not guns, it's mental illness. Well, if you talk to people who study this problem, it is true that the majority of these mass shooters are angry young men, but there are hundreds of millions of angry young men around the world. tens of millions of angry young men. Most of them don't shoot. It doesn't help us just to identify, and the majority of people who have mental illnesses are not shooters. So we can't sort through and identify ahead of time who might take actions like this. The only thing we can do is make sure that they can't have an entire arsenal when something snaps in them. And if we're going to do something about that, the politics has to change. The politics has to change. And the people who are troubled by this have to be as intense and as organized and as adamant about this issue as folks on the other side who are absolutists and think that any gun safety measures are somehow an assault on freedom or communistic, or a plot by me to, take over and stay in power forever or something. I mean, there are all kinds of crackpot conspiracy theories that float around there, some of which, by the way, are ratified by elected officials in the other party on occasion. So we've got to change. We've got to change the politics of this, and that requires people to feel, not just feel deeply, because I get a lot of letters after this happens. Do something. Well, okay. Here's what you need to do. You have to make sure that anybody who you are voting for is on the right side of this issue. And if they're not, even if they're great on other stuff, for a couple of election cycles, you got to vote against them and let them know precisely why you're voting against them. And you just have to, for a while, be a single issue voter, because that's what is happening on the other side. And that's going to take some time. I mean, the NRA has had a good start, they've been at this a long time. They've perfected what they do. You got to give them credit. They're very effective, because they don't represent the majority of the American people. But they know how to stir up fear. They know how to stir up their base. They know how to raise money. They know how to scare politicians. They know how to organize campaigns. And the American people are going to have to match them in their sense of urgency if we're actually going to stop this. Which isn't to say stopping all violence. We're not going to stop all violence. Violence exists around the world, sadly. Part of original sin. But our homicide rates are just a lot higher than other places that, by the way, have the same levels of violence. It's just you can't kill as many people when you don't have easy access to these kinds of weapons. And I'm deeply saddened about what happened yesterday, but Arnie's going back to Chicago. Let's not forget, this is happening every single day in forgotten neighborhoods around the country. Every single day. Kids are just running for their lives trying to get to school. Broderick, we were down in New Orleans sitting down with a group of young men when we were talking about Katrina, and I've got two young men next to me. Both of them had been shot multiple times. They were barely 20. So we got to make a decision. If we think that's normal, then we have to own it. I don't think it's normal. I think it's abnormal. I think we should change it. But I can't do it by myself. So main thing I'm going to do, John, is talk about it. And hope that over time I'm changing enough minds, along with other leaders around the country, that we start finally seeing some action. I don't think it's going to happen overnight. Cheryl Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. President. To go back to your opening remarks, you said that you won't sign another short-term CR. But as you know, yesterday Secretary Lew announced that the government's borrowing authority would run out around November 5th. Would you recommend negotiating an increase in the debt ceiling as part of these budget negotiations on spending caps? And also, does the Speaker's race complicate these negotiations?
I'm sure the Speaker's race complicates these negotiations. That was a rhetorical question. It will complicate the negotiations, but when it comes to the debt ceiling, we're not going back there. Maybe it's been a while, so let me just refresh everybody's memory. Raising the debt ceiling does not authorize us to spend more. It simply authorizes us to pay the bills that we have already incurred. It is the way for the United States to maintain its good credit rating, the full faith and credit of the United States. Historically, we do not mess with it. If it gets messed with, it would have profound implications for the global economy and could put our financial system in the kind of tailspin that we saw back in 2007, 2008. It's just a bad thing to do. So we're not going to negotiate on that. It has to get done in the next 5 weeks. So even though the continuing resolution to keep the government open lasts for 10 weeks, we have to get the debt ceiling raised in 5. You've got a shorter timetable to get that done. But here's the bottom line. Mitch McConnell, John Boehner, myself, Nancy Pelosi, Harry Reid, we've all spoken and talked about trying to negotiate a budget agreement. And yes, Speaker Boehner's decision to step down complicates it, but I do think that there is still a path for us to come up with a reasonable agreement that raises the spending caps above sequester to make sure that we can properly finance both our defense and non-defense needs, that maintains a prudent control of our deficits, and that we can do that in short order. It's not that complicated. It's, there's, the math is the math. And what I've encouraged is that we get started on that work immediately, and we push through over the next several weeks and try to leave out extraneous issues that may prevent us from getting a budget agreement. I know, for example, that there are many Republicans who are exercised about Planned Parenthood. And I deeply disagree with them on that issue. And I think that it's mischaracterized what Planned Parenthood does. But I understand that they feel strongly about it, and I respect that. But you can't have an issue like that potentially wreck the entire U.S. economy. Any more than I should hold the entire budget hostage to my desire to do something about gun violence. I feel just as strongly about that, and I think I've got better evidence for it. But the notion that I would threaten the Republicans that unless they passed gun safety measures that would stop mass shootings, I'm going to shut down the government and not sign an increase in the debt ceiling, would be irresponsible of me. And the American people rightly would reject that. Well, same is true for them. There are some fights that we fight individually. They want to defund Planned Parenthood, there's a way to do it. Pass a law, override my veto. That's true across a whole bunch of issues that they disagree with me on. And that's how democracy works. I got no problem with that. But you have to govern. And I'm hoping that the next speaker understands that the problem Speaker Boehner had or Mitch McConnell had in not dismantling Obamacare or not eliminating the Department of Education or not deporting every immigrant in this country was not because Speaker Boehner or Mitch McConnell didn't care about conservative principles. It had to do with the fact that they can't do it in our system of government, which requires compromise. Just like I can't do everything I want in passing an immigration bill or passing a gun safety bill. And that doesn't mean that I throw a tantrum and try to wreck the economy and put hardworking Americans who are just now able to dig themselves out of a massive recession, put them in harm's way. Wrong thing to do. Peter Alexander.
Thank you, Mr. President. You addressed, I want to follow up on John's questions about the issue that's obviously deeply personal and moving to you, that is the gun issue. Apart from Congress's inaction, apart from the desire from new laws, and beyond that, apart from the gun lobby, as you noted, the pattern is that these perpetrators are angry, aggrieved, oftentimes mentally ill young men. Is there something that you can do with the bully pulpit, with your moral authority, with your remaining time in office, to help reach these individuals who believe that gun violence is the way out?
No. I think I can continue to speak to the American people as a whole and hopefully model for them basic social norms about rejecting violence and cooperation and caring for other people, but there are a lot of young men out there. And having been one myself once, I can tell you that us being able to identify or pinpoint who might have problems is extraordinarily difficult. So I think we as a culture should continuously think about how we can nurture our kids, protect our kids, talk to them about conflict resolution, discourage violence. I think there are poor communities where, rather than mass shootings, you're seeing just normal interactions that used to be settled by a fist fight, settled with guns, where maybe intervention programs and mentorship and things like that can work. That's the kind of thing that we're trying to encourage through My Brother's Keeper. But when it comes to reaching every disaffected young man, 99% of, or 99.9% of whom will hopefully grow out of it, I don't think that there's a silver bullet there. The way we are going to solve this problem is that when they act out, when they are disturbed, when that particular individual has a problem, that they can't easily access weapons that can perpetrate mass violence on a lot of people. Because that's what other countries do. Again, I want to emphasize this. There's no showing that somehow we are inherently more violent than any other advanced nation, or that young men are inherently more violent in our nation than they are in other nations. I will say young men inherently are more violent than the rest of the population.
All right, and that was President Obama from earlier today at a press conference in the White House, talking about a range of topics, including the economy, and then lastly, the latest in Oregon, including the age-old question of the American gun debate and its laws. I do want to show you now the latest update story to the college shooting. We will go to that now.
President Obama has ordered flags around the nation to be flown at half-staff in honor of those murdered at a community college in Oregon. The president talked about what it will take to end this form of violence.
When it comes to reaching every disaffected young man, 99% of, or 99.9% of whom will hopefully grow out of it, I don't think that there's a silver bullet.
The death toll stands at 9. The body count could have been much higher had it not been for one student. 30-year-old Chris Mintz reportedly tried to stop the gunman from getting into a classroom. Mintz says he was shot 3 times. When he pleaded for his life by telling the gunman not to kill him on his son's birthday, he was shot at least 2 more times. He is expected to recover. President Obama says there's not something inherently wrong with Americans.
There's no sense that somehow it's something in the American character that is creating this. Levels of violence are on par between the United States and other advanced countries. What is different is homicide rates and gun violence rates.
In an odd twist of fate, one of the 3 Americans hailed as a hero for stopping a terrorist attack on a French train in August is a student at the college and would have been on campus. But instead, 22-year-old Alex Carlatos was on the set of Dancing with the Stars. When asked if he would have attempted to stop the gunman, he said, "I would have tried." In Roseburg, Oregon, Dan Springer, Fox News.
Wow, what a truly amazing update there from our Fox News team. And can you imagine that person that would have been there if it didn't conflict with his Dancing with the Stars schedule? And he was one of the people that was in that Paris train situation just a month ago. It's just remarkable where you are in life and sometimes why you are then taken from a situation and then put like he was for Dancing with the Stars. You don't know, you never can connect the dots looking backwards. I mean, looking forwards. You could only, look at going backwards, and that is just a clear example. Holy cow. Wow. Switching gears now. I need to switch gears because we've been on this story for a while now, and I appreciate everybody in the comment section. You guys are always amazing. You guys are always engaged, and that's what makes News Now News Now. It's you guys, because if it wasn't for you guys, we wouldn't stream because there would be no one watching, and we truly appreciate the community that has been built with News Now. So that is awesome to see. I have a story for you that the federal government is very concerned about, and it has to do with drones, where it could get very scary very fast for everybody in this country. Take a look.
FAA officials flying into town today at the request of Denver International Airport. The agency is fully on board with the Skyport and police when it comes to drone safety around the nation's runways. The new flying tools come in all shapes and sizes and have both hobby and commercial uses, but they also pose problems for other vehicles they share the sky with.
They can be pretty dangerous, so I try not to fly it anywhere close to people, let alone airports.
And understanding those risks is what the FAA, DIA, and the FBI want the public to know.
But operators who don't follow the rules are creating a potentially unsafe situation for commercial aircraft.
Which is why the FAA is putting out a new PSA to help drone users know how and where to fly.
You aren't allowed to fly higher than 400 feet, or that you need permission to fly within 5 miles of an airport.
Operators in 20 incidents are facing charges by the feds for flying too near airports, stadiums, or emergency scenes.
Our fines for egregious operations can be $27,500 per violation. Anybody that interferes with a manned aircraft can actually be sentenced up to a 20-year maximum sentence and $250,000 fine.
DIA is being proactive in light of 7 documented sightings at altitudes of 3,600 feet and as close as 500 feet to approaching aircraft. But as the PSA indicates, by next year, millions of these devices will be sold. At Man-Made Productions, they understand that drones can get the shot, but there is great risk.
There's substantial possibilities of both property damage and or somebody getting harmed because it is a flying object.
While drones around airports are a major concern, the FAA hopes that the education and enforcement piece being announced today here in Denver will go a long way to keep the flying public safe. At Stapleton, John Bowman, Fox 31, Denver.
Wow, can you imagine? I was just thinking about this while I was watching the story again. Could you imagine what it's going to be like, just say 5 years from now, how many drones we will see in the air? It's going to be remarkable, and it's kind of scary too if you were a pilot, they say they see drones all the time. That would freak you out. Because if you're a pilot, you really don't want to see anything in the air except clouds. Because if you see something in the air, there's a good chance that it could be coming towards your plane, and that's never a good thing. That's why they always have so many different elevations for the planes that make up the air traffic. I really couldn't believe that when I watched that story. I'm thinking in 5 years, guys, we're going to see so many drones in the sky, from deliveries. I mean, Amazon is just going to probably be the front runner. But I mean, everything from, surveillance to, it's going to be creepy, I think. Let me know what you guys think about this drone situation. I think it's a really cool idea. It gets the best shots, but then I think security is going to become a big issue in this debate once we get, we're talking drones everywhere. I'm thinking it's going to be like kites in the sky when you're young, except they're drones now. Let me know what you guys are thinking on that. Resolute says, Mike, it does freak me out on this situation. Yeah, and you know what? It's, a lot of drones are going to be crashing with each other. That's the first problem. And then they're eventually going to have to come down, and that's when we're going to have people get in scary situations. They're going to get hurt, or even worse, they're going to die. Because it's going to fall in a car, the car is going to swerve into the highway, and it's going to hit another car or hit a median, and then things are going to go bad from there. So it's gonna be a scary situation all around, I think. Billy says more laws on drones because they fly too near the planes. Yeah, they should not. That should be the last thing a pilot is worried about, right? A drone. But that's what they are worried about now, and I bet when these young pilots are going to get instruction, I bet this is a big topic now. Be careful when you see a drone. I mean, I would guess that's a big topic right now. Very scary stuff out there. And I say 5 years from now, going to see a lot of drones. Can you imagine? I mean, we already see some drones already, but I'm talking about like traffic, like how we have traffic on the I-10 and the 17 every morning. So, you guys are always great, always talking about the best stuff. You guys are always chatting, and you know what I like about this? I like when everyone stays on topic, and for the most part, all day today, you guys have been on topic for every story. Amazing. That's kudos to you. Great job, everybody. Yeah, I'm just scared about those drones a little bit. It's okay. It is okay in the long run, I think. We're going to switch gears now. Joe Biden was talking earlier, our vice president. We are going to now showcase his event in its entirety. That's one great thing about news now, and I like to preach this a lot because it's the coolest thing. When you watch the news or you watch other programs, you only get a snippet of the story. But we show everything in its entirety. That way you can comment and see everything the way a media person did, or the general public if they were in the event. So you don't have to go to the event. We bring it to you. And that's what News Now is all about. It's Friday evening. It's coming on 7:40. We're going to go to Vice President Joe Biden next at his event. I got that synced up for you. Here we go.
Will identify him as one of the 2 or 3 great legislators of our era. Men who had not just the courage and vision to write important legislation, but the tenacity and the skill to see it into law. An event that rarely occurs now in the modern Senate. I think probably Joe Biden and Ted Kennedy will be the 2 most highly rated by future historians. I saw Joe Biden take complex legislation with many, many moving parts, and over the course of not months but years, work diligently to persuade senators on both sides of the aisle to act in the nation's interest. And I think it's significant in the light of what we see now in our Congress, that as many Republicans as Democrats regarded Joe as a friend, a man who could be trusted, a man whose word was his bond, and who had only the national interest at heart. As Vice President, we've all seen him be of great support to our President and to our country. There's a limited time because the Vice President has to go on to another event, and I know you came this evening's event to hear him, not me. Keep going, but I just... I just say, after one particularly very, very difficult legislative battle in the Senate, an important one, over the Clean Air Act. It passed by one vote, and Joe Biden cast the deciding vote. And when it was over, I walked over to him and I said to him, Joe, you've got guts. And believe me, Joe Biden does have guts, along with brains, courage, integrity, and eloquence. It's my great honor to present to you my friend, the Vice President of the United States, Joe Biden.
I've got to leave now. I don't want to turn this into a mutual admiration society. That old joke, if my father were here, he'd believe it. If my mother were here, she'd wonder whether we were talking about my younger brother. But folks, I was really proud to serve in the United States, and I'm proud to be Vice President. But I consider myself a Senate man more than anything else. I served there for a long, long time. Matter of fact, George had left before I left, and when I was elected my second term, it was the year I got elected Vice President at the same time. Because of a quirk in the law in Delaware, I had to run for both offices. And it was time for me I got sworn in, and there were 13 days of legislation before I left to be sworn in on January 20th, the President to be Vice President of the United States. And the Senate historian came in, and they do what they call a history minute in the caucuses, the Republican caucus and the Democratic caucus, once a week. And they come in and say, on this day in 1890, such and such happened. And so the Senate historian walked in on my last day to the luncheon and said, the Vice President-elect's colleagues should know, and he was trying to make me feel good, that there are only 13 people in American history who've ever served as long as Joe Biden. And I thought, oh my God, how could that be? But the point is, I've known an awful lot of senators, and you all know Joe. Two people who I served with for 36 years. Two men with more integrity in their little finger than most people have in their whole body. Were a senator named Mike Mansfield from Montana, and I used to refer to him as Iron Mike, who served when I got there in '72, and George Mitchell. And George made my job as chairman of Foreign Relations and Judiciary Committees for a total, I guess, overlapping. I guess I had those positions for 25 or so years. Made it work for me. So I want to thank George. And as many of you have probably heard, there was another shooting today at a community college in rural Oregon. I don't have the details yet, but unfortunately, this has been happening far too often. The estimates are there's somewhere between 10 and 13 dead students, and somewhere between 15 and 25 additionally seriously wounded. So I want to say at the outset here, as you all know, there's nothing, well there may be, there's few things worse than getting that phone call saying your child is gone. Your child is gone. Or your brother, your sister, your husband, your wife. And folks, part of the dysfunction of our political system today is that there is an overwhelming consensus in America on two things that are equally defensible. The Second Amendment, insane gun legislation relating to background checks and the ability to, the Second Amendment doesn't say you can own a bazooka, it doesn't say you can own an F-15 with Hellfire missiles. There's the ability of the government to limit the type of weapon that is available. And although we don't have enough information now, now for me to comment on the specifics. My guess is I'm prepared to bet you that it was a semi-automatic or an automatic weapon. I don't know that yet, but that'd be my guess. For so many people to be shot in such a short amount of time. We're basically the only civilized country in the world where we have these massive murders in our country. And 87% of the American people agreed with the proposal I put together for the president on background checks and gun safety. Even over 60% of NRA families, National Rifle Association families, support it. So folks, I cite that as part of the dysfunction because we're able to have decided minorities prevent consensus from occurring. Which doesn't directly lead into what we're talking about today, but because my wife, I think, I'm not positive, this is the only first or second lady that teaches it as a full-time job for the last 7 years. She teaches 15 credits.
Just sent
2 masters and a doctorate. She teaches at a community college. And it brings home every time something happens in the school just how the safest place on earth should be. Our schools and our colleges. But that's for another day. So my thoughts and prayers, I'm sure along with yours, with the families who have lost folks today. You've been discussing, and you've had a long day, and I understand you're all day tomorrow, you've been discussing a lot of consequential issues facing the world, from public health issues to fights against extremism. And all these things are going to take time to impact on. But I want to make the point the founders of this forum, I think, believe, and I'm confident that if we focus all the stakeholders on these problems, there's not a problem we cannot solve. So I say to Nick and Matt, and understand Mom's here today. Mom's here today. Mom, as they say, Mom, as they say in Southern Delaware, they speak with accent. You've done good with that boy. You've done good with that boy. Thank you for that. Thank you. And I understand this is the 5th anniversary of this forum, and it's an honor to be here, addressing the important issues that are facing the country and the world. Requires immense determination. The combinations of everyone who has a stake in the shared success of the outcome of the issues you've raised, and that's why I admire Concordia so much. 5 years ago, you brought together the brightest minds of all sectors of society, government, policymakers, business executives, nonprofits, academics, to deal with the vexing problems the world faces. And now you're launching a Concordia campaign to focus on the scourge of human trafficking, which affects every country and every society. And defeating it is going to take a hell of a lot of coordination and work because there's so many moving parts. And it's vital to our future because societies where human trafficking is the norm, people live in fear literally of letting their child walk out the front door of their home. Schools are viewed as targets and not havens. Children don't have the opportunity to live their full potential. Investors avoid rather than invest in the communities that are deteriorating because of it, that need help badly. And it's a stain on the reputation of so many countries. Whether we're talking about poverty or human trafficking or generating an environment that can attract business to generate jobs and opportunity, all these things are impacted, in my view, if you'll forgive me, by three overriding concerns that overarchingly affect the possibility of making progress in all the things you talked about. The first is endemic corruption, state-sponsored corruption. Some of you have heard me say in speeches I've made on behalf of the administration that with regard to Russia in particular, but China to some degree, there are two new foreign policy weapons in the arsenal of any of those two countries. One is the use of oligarchs and endemic corruption to undermine the stability of governments. And the second is the use of energy as a weapon. But corruption is a cancer that eats away at the body politic that is designed to unite societies in order to be able to function. Corruption siphons away resources. It stunts economic growth. It prevents the establishment of government that people will respond to, government institutions that are required and necessary for a civilized society to function. From a court system you can trust to police agencies that you can rely on. But most importantly, it's the ultimate affront to the dignity of all people. Whether it's in Latin America, in the Northern Triangle, or Eastern Europe, or Southeast Asia, or Africa, it affects the ability to make progress on almost any front. Where corruption lives, almost everything else atrophies. Although our government uses both incentives as well as disincentives to impact on and ease corruption in these countries, we don't have the capacity to do it on our own. Those elements in governments that are rife with corruption, even they have good people inside, but are deathly afraid to do anything about it because there are no institutional or power centers that they can rely on to support their effort to speak out and speak up. Without the support of the business community or civil society or academia, they're left powerless to do what they know has to be done. Where a judicial system is corrupt, it's not possible to grow a business. Where intellectual property is stolen, it's not possible to innovate. Where media does not function freely, it's not possible to hold the powerful accountable. Let me give you a few examples. The President has asked me to be the point person on Ukraine and Russia's, I'll use the word accurately, invasion of Ukraine, as well as the Northern Triangle of Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, which is a source of incredible instability in the isthmus. When the Soviet Union fell, Ukraine became independent. A chance for a newfound democratic institutions to flourish, but Russia found other ways to control Ukraine with the use of oligarchs and corruption and energy as foreign policy tools. Though the Soviet Union collapsed and Ukraine got its freedom, nothing happened except corruption took root deeply in Ukrainian society. And then along came the Maidan, the second revolution after the Orange Revolution, where the people of Ukraine took to the streets and to the town center called the Maidan, demanding that their government be accountable. the then leader, quote, popularly elected leader, whom I was on the phone with, urging him not to have snipers begin to shoot. He didn't shoot, but he shot out of the country, leaving behind his own zoo, literally a zoo he had, and incredible wealth and mansions, demonstrating for all the world to see just how thoroughly corrupt the government was. But there was a demand for freedom. We made it clear to the newly elected government, and Mr. Poroshenko, I've spent many, many days in Ukraine, and with before and after. Mr. Poroshenko came along, and he began to build he was an oligarch himself. But I judge people by their motives when they, quote, give it the office. He lost billions of dollars in investments he had in Russia, in his chocolate empire, in order to try to begin to set up a democracy. He's outperformed European expectations and most people's expectations to try to build a democracy. But the constant refrain the President authorized me to speak to was, you must demonstrably move on corruption in your country. They've been working hard to reform their system. It's beginning to pay off. New laws on asset disclosure, independent National Anti-Corruption Bureau, greater government transparency, and so much more. I speak with President Poroshenko and the Speaker, Mr. Yatsenyuk, almost weekly to continue to bang away at why they have to take on risk themselves the endemic corruption, some of which still exists. And I use you as an example. Some of the leading corporate executives in America, some of the great multinational companies, I'm told, spoke here today. From Coca-Cola to others, I'm sure, that were here. Because they desperately want you investing in Ukraine. They know their entire future lies in the EU and in the West. And the point you have to keep making to them as they approach you is, we will not play if you continue to be paid. We will not engage if you do not act. I was with Mr. Poroshenko on Monday this week at the United Nations. We talked about the great progress, actually Tuesday, resisting the Russian invasion and attempts to collapse his government. We talked about the need to maintain support in the European Union. I'm going to say something that will be characterized as classically Biden. I'm going to tell you the straight truth, unvarnished. Europe is not enamored with continuing to impose sanctions on Russia because it's costing them some at home. The only reason they are is the President has been emphatic that Russia must pay for this invasion, or we will pay later. The President loves always quoting, he calls them Bidenisms. You know, it's either pay me now or pay me later, and reality has a way of intruding. If we do not sustain, as long as Ukraine continues to deal as it has, if we do not sustain them, the price will be much larger. Watch what happens in the rest of Eastern Europe. Watch what happens in NATO. And so, we've talked about how cohesion in the EU will crack if Ukraine reverts to its decades-long history of corruption. I know tomorrow you're going to hear from she's not only bright, but a really, really courageous young woman, Paula Dobransky. I know her. I met her on the Maidan. She risked her life. She was part of civil society. The hardest transition to make in any of these developing countries who are seeking to come out from under the control of either oligarchs, dictators, and/or without come out from under control of spheres of influence, is for civil society to begin, after all the years in opposition, to be willing to get engaged and actually run for political office, to actually dirty their hands and get into the game of trying to change the legislative process. This young woman you're about to hear from tomorrow did just that. She's become a clarion voice. She's been threatened physically, politically, but she speaks out. And I can't tell you, Mark, how happy I am you are showcasing her. Because there are young women and men like her in all the countries that are struggling to find a way now. But Kyiv needs a vocal private sector, a vocal business community, a vocal civil society, demanding transparency. All the other things you're doing to try to change the life and circumstance of so many people around the world are going to have little effect. To all you business leaders, as I said, Ukraine and other parts of the world desperately want American investment, business know-how, research, and development. Every time I go, and I've now traveled over 1 million, I guess, a couple 100,000 miles since I've been vice president. I've met with almost every major head of state. And every developing country or country trying to emerge, you know what they ask? Can you bring Silicon Valley with you? Well, you think I'm kidding? I'm not kidding. You all know it. You're all extremely well-traveled and sophisticated. But it won't make much difference if we can't deal with the corrupt systems. Make it absolutely clear you're ready, but you will not engage unless officials are not engaged in taking kickbacks, unless there's transparency in the law, unless contracts are protected, unless there's a judicial system that you can count on. That's the only way it will change. It will not be by the exhortations of Vice President Joe Biden or President Barack Obama. Another example close to home is the Northern Triangle. There's no reason why Central America can't be the bridge between North and South America. For the first time in anyone's life, you can look at the hemisphere from Canada to the tip of Argentina and envision a continent that is democratic, middle class, and free. It's within our reach. It can be transformative. But what we have is at a minimum, beyond Venezuela and a few other places, we have this incredible bottleneck in Central America. Imagine what you can do in the business community if you're able to build the electric grid needed to bring energy to 70% of populations that have no energy. Imagine the entrepreneurial fire you could light if we actually build a gas pipeline from Texas through Mexico down across the isthmus. Imagine what is possible. Imagine how instead of 70% of the youth in each of those countries saying their desire is to leave for America and not stay home. Imagine what we can do if we can begin to build a civil society for them as well as our own naked self-interest. But Central America is still mired in corruption. That's why when the president asked me to manage the policy in the hemisphere, I spent time in each of those countries, meeting with each of those leaders, putting together what they asked me to do because I had drafted Plan Colombia back in 2000. Well, before that, it finally passed, which transformed Colombia, which was on the brink of becoming nothing more than a narco state. That's not about me, it's about the Colombians. And they said, will you draft such a law for us? The President authorized me to do that with the help of the Congress. But the sine qua non for proceeding was dealing with corruption. At the end of the Civil War in Guatemala, the United Nations put in place the Guatemalan Anti-Corruption Commission. They call it CICIG after the Civil War. And it did great work cleaning out corruption. But the leadership, as I put together this plan with them signing on because they desperately need help, didn't want to renew its mandate. But with the President's permission, I insisted we would not help unless they renewed the mandate. And what's the result? The President is thrown out of office, will probably be thrown in jail. The Vice President's behind bars. The bulk of the leadership is thoroughly corrupt and is in jail, going to jail, or in exile. They've elected somebody who's going to have a tough time. He looks like he's squeaky clean, a comedian with no past electoral experience except that he looks like he is thoroughly committed to continuing to clean up the system. The Guatemalan people have turned out in the hundreds of thousands because they think for the first time they have a chance. They have a chance. They remain committed to purging from government and governmental institutions corruption. We have to help, but the same needs to be done in the rest of Central America to open up the enormous possibilities, establish an electric grid that will bring light to enormous segments of the community, not unlike what we did in the TVA back in the 30s. And I don't have to tell those of you who are in business the possibilities of pipelines, shipping, business opportunities, expansion of ports and airports, and the opportunities that are available to you. But I'm here to ask you for your help in a public-private partnership to insist on standards that will give these countries a chance to deliver for their people. And it can only be done with more transparency, openness, and giving people the opportunity to participate. The second issue that sort of overrides all that you're talking about and we'll talk about is the issue of sustainable development and extreme poverty. I'd like to very briefly focus on one issue, what the President's initiative in Africa called Power Africa. We're providing not only resources and expertise, but incentives to the continent of Africa to invest in clean energy technology to bring power to people across the continent and also generate jobs. A few weeks ago, I met in my office with President Yayi of Benin, a small West African country about the size of Ohio. Together, we signed a compact to help modernize their power sector, which can again transform that country. With our help, banks will lend money, companies will lay wires, entrepreneurs will open business, and people will rise out of poverty because they can turn on the lights, figuratively and literally. The initial $7 billion commitment from the U.S. government has mobilized more than $20 billion off the sidelines from the private sector and will bring electricity to more than 60 million African homes. Neither the President nor I think government is not the answer. The free enterprise system is the answer. But what we found is, if we engage in set goals in the Recovery Act, we spend over $800 billion. I might add, as every outside group has shown, with less than 0.25% waste or fraud. Darrell Issa, the Republican from California, who strongly opposed the act, has hailed it as the model for how we should spend money when we spend it. The reason I mention this to you is that we have an opportunity, a transformative opportunity, to bring power and empower people to do things they never could do before. Grow businesses, teach classes at night, connect with distant families. Many don't understand that giving people hope is sometimes more consequential than giving them help. Everyone in this room understands it. And in this case, we're doing both. But we have to do more of it around the world. People are better than we give them credit for if given a chance. The last issue that needs to be faced is the issue of a generation. It will be the issue for several generations, the dispositive issue. And it overrides every other problem we face. We can literally, not figuratively, be overwhelmed in all of our efforts if we don't deal with it. It's climate change. Not only is it an issue of life and death long term, it's a national security issue. Most people talk about climate change in terms of the science of it. Now, a lot of our friends on the other team, they don't think there's global warming. They also deny gravity and a few other things. It's just kind of fascinating. But the one thing that gets the attention of my conservative friends, and by the way, let's be honest, they're winners and losers as we deal with climate change. And we have to be careful to take care of the losers. For example, fossil fuel, coal in particular, is a particular culprit as we switch to natural gas, which is cleaner, and renewable energy, which is even cleaner. But we cannot leave behind an entire way of life, not just a way of living, but a way of life. I come from the coal regions of Scranton, Pennsylvania. As a kid, we moved because coal died, although my family never worked in the mines. We have an obligation to help those folks in West Virginia, Southern Ohio, Wyoming transition, because they're good, decent people doing hard work for a long, long time. But what gets the attention of my conservative friends when I talk about climate change, and it surprises them, is the Department of Defense several years ago put together a very thick compendium on global warming, saying that global warming is a threat multiplier. They talk in no-nonsense terms about our security and our stability. They point out that as time goes on and the physical changes continue to occur, conflicts will occur. Millions of people are displaced, destabilizing existing governments. Those of you who are interested and know a little bit about the war in Darfur, and I've been to Darfur like many of you, that's a consequence of extreme drought, eliminating arable land, and two peoples, African both, but Christian and Muslim, fighting over the arable land. Tens of thousands of people slaughtered and massacred. Look at what's happening in terms of the displacement that's taking place as a consequence of Syria and Iraq and Afghanistan. 1.5 million people fleeing to Europe, coming close to destabilizing some of those governments. Imagine what happens, as the military points out, if sea level rise 1.5 feet more, and you have millions of people in South Asia, literally unable to live in their homes with mass migration. That's the stuff of which conflict is made. That's the stuff which destabilizes governments. That's the stuff of war. Reality has a way of intruding, and it is intruding already. Everyone seems extremely surprised that President Xi, whom I know well because I spent a lot of time with him when he was vice president. I traveled for 5 days with him in China, and he 4 days with me in the United States at the request of President Hu and President Obama, so we get to know one another. Everybody said, look at Xi. All of a sudden, he's focused on climate change. There's two things populations don't like, whether they are communists, fascists, democracies, whatever form of government they have. They abhor corruption because they don't benefit, and they don't like dying. because of the environment. Without water that's clean, air that you can breathe. The estimates are that in China alone, they say 1,500,000 die per year because of smog. Other estimates, I will not challenge their estimates, say as many as 4 million people a year die. You want to get the attention of a government, have them do nothing about that. Raise your hand if you've been in Beijing in the last 2 years. You didn't do a lot of jogging in the streets, did you? I'm not being facetious. I'm not being facetious. So the point I'm trying to make is these are deadly serious issues that if we don't attend to them, and it's not the scope of what you're doing now, all the other things. Last month I was in California to announce a $102 million competitive grant to companies, businesses, universities, and research laboratories in 37 states working to reduce the cost of solar energy by 75% by the year 2000. Some of you know now that in terms of a kilowatt hour, wind energy is as cheap as coal right now. Because of some of you in this audience, we have radically reduced the cost of solar energy. Radically. We're on the cusp of making renewable energy competitive across the board with carbon-based fuels. On that same trip, I participated in the U.S.-China Summit, Leaders Summit on Global Warming in Los Angeles, which brought together not only leaders from China's federal government, as ours, but also from their state legislators, in effect, their governors. And the governors from 4 provinces in China that attended, the carbon they emit in those 4 provinces exceeds the carbon emissions from Japan and Australia combined. Japan, all of Japan, and or all of Australia. In 4 provinces. So what's happening is those local leaders are moving to raise the bar even higher than President Xi has agreed to with President Obama in cutting back emissions. Los Angeles and Beijing, 2 of the world's great cities, are working together on low-carbon urban planning, research projects, and technology exchanges. That's what we need to combat, at least in part, climate change. Partnerships at every level, city leaders working with their federal governments, governments working with the private sector, nonprofits, the academic community. That's how we'll find solutions. But I'm preaching to the choir here because this is all about public-private partnerships. Ultimately, partnerships do more than just take on real challenges we're seeing day to day. Challenges that affect people's daily lives. Partnerships are vital to helping generate a virtuous cycle. They create sustainable energy solutions and will position us to compete economically in the 21st century and create millions of new jobs. More jobs are created in the solar energy area than any other part of industry. Right here in the United States. And these are good paying jobs. These are middle class jobs. You can raise a family on. I know I'm referred to all the time in Washington as middle class Joe. In Washington, that's not meant as a compliment. That means you're probably not sophisticated if you're middle class. But I'm sophisticated about the middle class. Without us figuring how to deal them back into the game, ladies and gentlemen, you're all in trouble. When the middle class does well, business does very well. And the poor have a way up. And if the middle class continues to shrink, they are the glue that has held the political and social fabric of this nation together for the past 100 years. Because what's America about? I can describe America to you in one word: possibilities. Possibilities. And when people think their possibilities are no longer within their reach, things change. Things change. I have a lot of economists with me who are great academics, receive significant awards, and when I say middle class, the debate would begin: is it 51,500 or 52? Middle class is not a number. And I'll end with this. Middle class is a value set. Middle class in America means you're able to own your own home and not just have to rent it. That you can send your kid to a park where you know they're going to come home safely. That you can send them to a high school that you know if they do well, they were able to get to college, and if they get to college, you can pay to get them there. And when your mom dies, you can take your dad in when he's geriatric and care for him and hope your children never have to care for you. That's why we've been the most powerful nation on earth. That's the reason. And if you take a look at everyone from the IMF to Standard & Poor's, the greatest concern they have about economic growth is the concentration of wealth. Listen, I'm not Bernie Sanders. He's a great guy, by the way. No, he really is. I'm not a populist. I'm a realist.
And that concludes the Joe Biden event. I know everybody in the chat was a big fan of that event right there. Appreciate everybody talking, and I want to say this again. We have the best crew watching this stream right now, so thank you everybody for making your Friday the Fox 10 News Now stream. We appreciate that. I do want to go into, and I do want to show you what our 10-day forecast looks like. And there you go. Tomorrow, it's going to be a great Saturday, 95 degrees in Arizona, sunny skies. Then look how the temperatures dip. Wednesday, 84 degrees with possible rain. Look at Wednesday then. We go down to 80 with sunshine for a high. 64 for a low. Get the jackets ready. You gotta love living here, folks, especially now, especially with these temperatures dropping. Tell me how excited you are to get out there and just enjoy it. What are you going to be doing? Are you going to be hiking? Are you going to be, just walking around more because you can, because it won't be so scorching hot. We had the 110s. We had the 112s this summer. And we're getting closer and closer to that beautiful, beautiful time in Arizona where there's just so much activity here. And if you're not from Arizona, well, you can bask at these temperatures and really, really just hope and wish that you were in Arizona. I do want to show you a reason why we should all be celebrating Arizona weather even when it is hot. Because luckily, for the most part, for the majority, we do not have to deal with hurricanes. And right now on the East Coast, they are bracing for hurricane. And it's looking like it's going to be pretty bad. Take a look, everyone.
The good news, new information shows a lessening threat from Hurricane Joaquin to New York City and the East Coast, but city officials say it is way too early to know just where this storm will go. With Hurricane Joaquin's path still uncertain, New York City is activating its Emergency Operations Center, and Mayor Bill de Blasio is urging residents to take precautions.
The hurricane appears to be moving offshore,
But let me emphasize, we can't rule out any possibility at this point. It's still too early to tell for sure.
City officials positioning various equipment like lights and generators in vulnerable locations and readying rescue squads, insisting they've learned lessons from Hurricane Sandy 3 years ago.
Look, we're not going to be surprised here. One, because we've gone through painful past experiences. Two, because we're talking today on Thursday about something that will have its earliest impacts on Sunday and Monday.
MTA officials also taking steps to get ready, fueling up vehicles, but complicating all these preparations with or without an impact from Hurricane Joaquin. A separate storm is expected to drench the tri-state over the weekend, leading to coastal flooding.
Certain areas, no matter what we do, flood. Certain areas of the FDR Drive, things like that. It's just additions to the water, and they're going to flood. But we deal with them pretty quickly.
With a new threat, it is clear scars of past storms are still visible. The sandbags outside Sonny's Bar in Red Hook, Brooklyn look worn and used because they are. They've been here since Hurricane Sandy, says barkeep Jen Storch.
After Sandy,
And we know the whole News Now family will be thinking about those on the East Coast. We're hoping that this hurricane just doesn't hit landfall very hard. We do not want a Hurricane Sandy, and of course we do not want a Hurricane Katrina situation. So we are thinking about those on the East Coast, even though we are going to be having some great weather this weekend. We do not want to take that for granted here in Arizona because we know just how bad it is, even when it just rains just a little bit here because of the flooding. We could, 4 to 12 inches out there expected. Let's all be thinking about them this weekend. Boy, I hope nothing goes terribly bad. I want to play you one more weather-related story that that they are bracing with. Let's hope, guys. Boy, let's really hope. Here we go. DC storm preps. It's happening.
It's clogged streets and caused headaches, so fears of more scenes like these from Virginia over the weekend have prompted the organizers of some Washington area events to scramble their plans.
I'm kind of glad they changed it because it's a good night for a high school game.
We moved up here from Florida a long time ago. We're used to hurricanes and rain. It's fine. It's just rain.
Here in Leesburg, the rain may come, but the show, or at least the game, must go on. Students from Herndon and Tuscarora competed in this high school football game tonight, though it was scheduled for Friday. This and several other high school football.
All right, so that is the latest out there in D.C. You could tell they were juggling their high school sports, getting the games in yesterday so they didn't have to deal with whatever's going to be coming this weekend. Again, we are thinking about those on the East Coast. It's 8:30 coming up here on the News Now live stream. We have 30 more minutes together before we sign off, and you will be joined by Samia starting Monday. Hope everybody is having a great start to their weekend. I do want to get to some news here, and sadly we got to go to Oregon, where they did have a hospital press conference. I showed this earlier about 3:45. If you weren't watching at 3:45, I think it's a good time to play it. We can all get really more accustomed to what the professionals and the medical staff had to deal with when all those patients came in. I just couldn't imagine.
These are tragic events. We received 10 patients at Mercy Medical Center today. Of those 10, 3 patients were transferred immediately to a higher level of care. 2 patients were treated and released in a relatively short period of time. 4 patients went to the operating room for various procedures, and unfortunately 1 patient was deceased in the emergency room.
Are you able to say that that patient, was he or she brought to this hospital living and passed away here?
The patient arrived in extremis and passed away in the emergency room.
Doctor, can you talk about some of the injuries that you saw?
You know, all the injuries were a result of gunshot wounds to various parts of the body on that, from extremities to the abdomen and or the chest or bones.
If I'm reading my numbers correctly, you still have 4 patients here then, correct?
We currently have 4 patients who are still here in the hospital.
What are their conditions?
One is in critical condition. The other 3 remain in stable condition.
Can you say, as far as the injuries, as you mentioned, gunshot wounds, obviously, were some patients hit multiple times?
Some patients did receive multiple gunshot wounds to various parts of the body.
Where were the 3 other patients transferred?
To the best of my knowledge, the 3 other patients were transferred to the Peace Health Riverbend in Springfield.
Via life flight?
I believe so.
Can you talk about the ER and the OR at this point? When these patients, came in, was it chaos? Was it controlled?
I think the best way to describe it is controlled chaos. Obviously, we practice and we do drill for these type of events. It is still, fortunately, rare on that. The emergency department staff, the physicians, the EMS and the first responders really came together as a team to stabilize and then transfer those patients to the operating room. And I'd like to say, I'm amazingly proud of the work of our staff and our physicians. We had retired physicians calling in, asking if they were needed. That's the type of community response that we've received during this.
Have you ever been involved in an incident like this in your career?
In a community with our limited resources, no. In larger metropolitan areas, yes. But this is the first time in Douglas County and Roseburg, which we have had to face an incident like this, fortunately.
Obviously.
Describe your feelings or describe your emotions when you heard that the Code Blue or Code Zero was coming in and you had multiple gunshot victims. Describe that, please.
Initially, everyone is in a bit of disbelief that, can this happen here? Immediately, though, everyone starts preparing for what do we need to do to take care of these patients? What are our resources? Calling in our resources, calling in the staff, getting ready to triage what we need on that. The next few days are my biggest concerns for our staff, how we support our staff. During these events, everybody pulls together, does an amazing job. The next few days will be difficult.
Kelly, you might be able to better answer this question, and Doctor, you can too, by all means. Can you talk about the support you've gotten from the community? I've heard rumblings of people bringing coffee, even support from across the country.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's been absolutely fantastic for the support we've got here locally, but also so nationwide. Also, as you know, we have a very, very busy emergency department, and people come in for different types of events. Even today, during that time, we saw less people than we normally would, and I think that's a very big point that the community said, well, maybe I can just hold off for a few hours or maybe a day to come in for whatever emergency I have because there's, more people that need help right now than just them. We have had different hospitals throughout the country send pizza, flowers to the staff. I mean, I think everybody really grasped the emotional toll this takes on everybody, and they're trying to give as much support as they possibly can.
There's been blood banks around the state calling for donations.
Right.
Have blood transfusions been a problem today?
Blood transfusions were given and administered. Our supplies of blood have been adequate, and the blood bank partners we work with have been able to meet our needs.
Yeah.
We will be having a blood drive here tomorrow at the hospital. So, correct.
12 to 5, Community Cancer Center.
That is because of what happened, right? Or was that already scheduled?
No, that's because of what happened.
Because of what happened.
That's right.
Okay. Anything else?
Doctor, can you revisit the numbers again? You said there were 10.
Sure. Emergency Medical Center received 10 patients as a result of the events this morning. 3 of them were transferred to a higher level of care, Peace Health Riverbend. 2 of them were treated and released quite quickly. 4 of the patients went to the operating room, and 1 patient was deceased in the emergency room at this point.
As far as the 4 who went into surgery, do they remain in surgery at this hour, or are they out of surgery now?
I believe all but 1 are out of surgery at this point.
And your prognosis, do you think they will be injuries that they will be able to survive?
All 4 are doing well and are expected to survive the injuries.
Are they still in, you said there's 1 in critical, or are they still being operated on?
There is 1 in critical condition, 3 are stable, One, I believe, still remains in the operating room at this point.
Doctor, can you tell us where the wounds were on each victim? You couldn't, how many times they were fired?
You know, there are multiple victims. There are multiple places from the extremities, hands, abdomen, legs, back, spine are the ones that I am aware of.
And all from single gunshot to multiple gunshot, or all multiple?
Both single and multiple.
The three that were transferred, they went to Sacred.
They went to
So obviously some very hard things to have to listen to as this doctor seen so many victims come into his hospital, and he just said that it was a scene that his staff locally there never saw in their lifetime. Obviously in bigger cities, like he said, they see these situations where multiple gunshot victims do come in, but for that hospital, that must have been something for them to see. But you could see by the doctor and how his whole team is handling the situation that they were very professional. And boy, I just, man, it's hard to talk about sometimes. I do want to tell you about a story that I had. About a year ago, I have a friend that's in the ATF. And he was able, and part of his job is to go to these horrible, horrible scenes when these incidents do occur, and he needs to go there. He was at the Columbine scene, and then he was also at the Aurora scene years later, you know, at the movie theater. And I asked him, I said, what was that like? And he says, well, first off, I don't wish that on anybody. But he says, here's what I'll tell you. The difference between Columbine and Aurora. He said Aurora was much more difficult to go into that scene. And I'll tell you why. And I asked him, well, why is that? He said it wasn't because the amount of people. It didn't have anything to do with that. But you got to remember, back when Columbine happened in 1999, students and people, they didn't have cell phones. But then years later in Aurora at the movie theater, they did. And when he walked into that scene, all he heard was their cell phones going off right next to their dead bodies. Could you imagine? Because all the family members and friends are trying to get a hold of these people, and there's no one to pick up the phone. I really, I couldn't believe that story when I heard it, and it really, I think, when you hear a story like that, it really hits home how fortunate you gotta feel in life. No matter what's going on in your life, you really gotta think and say, it could be a lot worse. It could be what these poor families have to deal with. Boy, it's just something. Wow, I'm a little shaken up here, so I'm going to go to this package presser that they had earlier. I'll be right back.
The tragic events that unfolded today at Umpqua Community College. These sort of tragedies aren't supposed to happen here, yet they did, and it leaves tons of questions in our minds. And so, as this is a very active investigation and the investigation continues, there are a few questions that I can answer for you, but there'll be more to come. It's very early in this event, and we are still trying to confirm a great amount of information that is floating around, and a great amount of information that we need to confirm. I want to say first and foremost that our victims and families of our victims are our priority. Everything that we do from here on will be for them. At this time, we are reporting and can confirm 10 fatalities in the shooting. 7 additional injuries. Those that were injured were initially transported to our local hospital, and 3 of those that were critically injured were transferred to another hospital up in the Eugene area. We know there are conflicting reports of the numbers of casualties, and I can tell you that this number is the best, most accurate information we have at this time. The FBI has established a toll-free number for tips and families. That number is 1-800-225-5324. Also can be remembered as 1-800-CALL-FBI. When you do this, you choose option 7. Again, this number is to help reunite and provide information to the families of the victims. This event has been deemed a mass casualty event, which brings with it hundreds of resources to this small community. Along with those resources and the fact that this is a mass casualty incident brings specific protocols that we must follow. That includes specific processes by which the state medical examiner's office may manage identification. And because of these protocols, the need to notify each family, we don't anticipate releasing the names of the fatalities for 24 to 48 hours. The law enforcement investigation into the shooter and into his motivation is ongoing. We are not ready at this time to make any comments about him. Reunification continues at the Douglas County Fairgrounds. Family and students should gather there. There are counselors at the fairgrounds providing assistance to all the folks that are down there. At this time, I'd like to have my Public Information Officer, Corporal Wes Hudson, address some other issues. Thank you.
So we're going to continue to use the hashtag UCC shooting on our Twitter account, which is DouglasCOSO. Further written updates will be posted to our social media accounts, our website, and to flashalerteugene.net. We have a number of agencies that have provided a lot of resources to this incident, and at a future briefing we'll walk through what those are and what that looks like. We also anticipate having another briefing later this evening, and we'll
All right, folks. Well, we are back. Thank you for letting me have a moment there, and sorry I had to play that old press conference there for you, but we all are updated, and then I'm going to get to some a better story as we end this stream coming up in just about 15 minutes. Of course, if you are a local, you got to tune in at 9 o'clock to Fox 10 Phoenix for all the latest and greatest to close out your week as we go into the weekend. So smiles all ahead. We're going to have a great weekend, everybody. I want to show you what we have. Looking from South Mountain, that will make you smile, everybody. That is a beautiful look at our city and the valley. Embrace life and enjoy it. We do have one more thing that we do want to show you before we close down shop. It's a UN Security Council briefing.
Often fragile social cohesion of multicultural societies has also served as well the rank of extremists and terrorists by stoking ethnic tensions. The Security Council which unfortunately has been deeply divided on this issue of finding appropriate solutions to the conflicts prevailing in the Middle East and North Africa, should lead by example and reaffirm the importance of the peaceful settlement of disputes as stipulates Chapter 6 of the United Nations Charter. The government of Angola reaffirms its commitment to actively support the World Coalition to fight the terrorist threat, the spread of extremist ideologies, taking into account that no country is safe from such a threat. I thank you, Mr. President.
Я благодарю министра Шикоти за его заявление. Предоставляю слово его превосходительству господину Анифе Аману, министру иностранных дел Малайзии.
The Foreign Minister of Malaysia.
Mr. President, Excellencies, I thank the Russian Federation for convening this meeting, and Malaysia welcomes this initiative through which we hope the Council could have constructive and fruitful discussions on the contemporary conflicts in the Middle East and North Africa or MENA region. Revisiting underlying causes connected to the seemingly intractable conflicts in the MENA region at this juncture is timely initiative. The region and affected countries and societies are perhaps worse off today than when those conflicts began. Mr. President, you call for a comprehensive analysis of the causes of conflicts, for sharing and exchanging views on possible solutions, and for reaffirmation of a common commitment to counter terrorist threats in and beyond MENA region is, I believe, a useful exercise for the Council. Although the scope is ambitious, we are fully supportive. Malaysia reiterates its fullest condemnations of all acts, methods, and practices of terrorism, and reaffirms its commitment to combat terrorism in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations and international law. We strongly reject association of terrorism with any race, culture, or religion. Indeed, there is no one-size-fits-all framework in analyzing or addressing the various conflicts in the MENA region. Nevertheless, we may infer some commonalities to better inform our common efforts in countering terrorism and violent extremism. Firstly, due to the current political and security instability, countries such as Iraq, Libya, Syria, and Yemen are seen as fertile ground by the terrorists. Political and security vacuum is exploited by terrorist groups to increase recruitment, expand territorial control, and smuggle in weapons. In those cases, terrorism is not the root cause of conflict, but symptomatic of political instability. Secondly, the presence of terrorist groups in those and other affected countries has deepened sectarian divisions, thereby exacerbating political and social instability. The longer such divisions fester, sowing discord and fear among the populations, the longer it takes for the torn social fabric to heal. Left unchecked, these would further prolong instability and serve the terrorist agenda. And thirdly, pre-existing situations of gross human rights violations and dire humanitarian predicament in the affected countries provide a very compelling narrative for recruitment. While the FTF phenomenon is not new, current scale of the involvement in MENA region conflicts is unprecedented. Furthermore, the terrorist narrative and propaganda, particularly by Daesh, is expertly communicated at a global level through social media and messaging platform. Just to illustrate the pernicious nature and effects of such messaging, consider this, Mr. President. In Malaysia, a multi-ethnic, multi-religious, and multicultural country, which is quite geographically distant from MENA region, authorities have, since 2012, arrested over 100 persons suspected of linkages with Daesh for being supporting FTFs. As a further example, a 26-year-old woman, a doctor, was reported to have left a relatively comfortable middle-class life to marry a Daesh fighter in the Middle East, whom she has never met and whose language she does not speak. She even detailed her experience as a Daesh wife on a social media and encouraged other young women to do the same. In a chilling tweet, she said, and I quote, "A life without terror is like drinking seawater. It keeps you thirsty and causes you dehydrated." Now, against such deeply ingrained extremism, it seems clear to me that the war must be won not through the use of force, of arms, but through a triumph of mind, of heart, and of wills. Mr. President, at the national level, Malaysia has intensified efforts to prevent terrorist groups and cells for operating in the country, particularly for the recruitment and fundraising purposes. In November last year, the government tabled a white paper at Parliament on the threat posed by Daesh on the possible responses. At the same time, existing legislation has been strengthened, including on the countering and preventing of financing of terrorism. New legislation has also been enacted, namely the Prevention of Terrorism Act, or POTA, 2015, and the Special Measures Against Terrorism in Foreign Countries Act 2015, with a view to addressing the FTF phenomenon. One key feature of POTA, which I wish to share with Council concerns its provisions on rehabilitation and de-radicalization. The assumptions underlying this provision is rooted in the belief that the fight against terrorism cannot be won through force or punitive measures alone. On the social and education front, authorities engage closely with religious and community leaders to nip radicalizations and extremism in the bud, as well as disseminating clear and accurate information on the true teachings of the various faiths and religion. In terms of capacity for outreach, awareness, raising, and research, we are fortunate to have Southeast Asia Regional Center for Counterterrorism in Kuala Lumpur. Additionally, as stated by my Prime Minister at yesterday's summit on countering ISIL and CVE, Malaysia is actively exploring the possibility of establishing a regional digital counter-messaging communication center, or RDC3. Mr. President, Malaysia remains convinced that in the context of the situation in the Middle East, the threat posed by terrorism cannot be effectively addressed by the international community only if it is prepared to take a self-critical and unbiased look at the root cause of terrorism and act to redress the grievances, injustices, and gross violations of human rights. We cannot allow the plight of long-suffering Palestinians living under the occupation to be cynically exploited by terrorist groups in their narrative couched in the terms of good versus evil. In our view, a just and durable solution to the solution in Palestine is long overdue. At this point in time, prolonged occupation also feeds the terrorist narrative and may also contribute to radicalization. Malaysia looks forward to engaging with the Council members on the draft resolution, which you, Mr. President, spoke earlier, and Malaysia remains committed to achieving unity of purpose and of actions by this Council. In concluding, I reiterate Malaysia's firm belief that in order for the Council to continue playing a constructive and positive role in conflicts in the MENA region, it must find the will to overcome differences and speak in one voice. I thank you, Mr. President.
Я благодарю министра Омана за его заявление. Предоставляю слово его превосходительству господину Джону Керри, государственному секретарю Соединенных Штатов Америки.
Mr. President, thank you very much, and thank you for the chance to address this council, to all the colleagues on the Security Council. I appreciate the fact that Russia's presidency has chosen to focus on this issue, and I welcome the opportunity to talk about the urgent challenge of countering terrorism in the Middle East, North Africa, and elsewhere. This is a topic that the Council has explored many times, going back to 9/11 attacks, and even before. We have come together fairly often to condemn terrorism and also to take concerted action to counter violent extremist organizations. So this is not a debate about goals, I don't think. We all oppose the aggressive ambitions of such organizations as ISIL, Al-Qaeda, and groups that initiate or that are imitating them or affiliated with them. We all oppose the atrocities that they commit, and we all want to end the suffering that they continue to inflict. So there's no debate about that. The question that we face is how do you best do it?
Installation. Let's check out one of these.
There are basic
to make
principles that we believe should guide our
The more
strategy.
we bundle up here, the
First,
less
in
we need
confronting
to
terrorism,
here. Let's
we
do
have to
this.
take a
Get AutoCAD
comprehensive
installation for
approach.
just $29.68.
That was quite
Home Depot.
eloquently
More saving,
talked
more
by our heads of state at the Countering Violent Extremism Summit that President Obama hosted. There was a great deal of discussion. I thought there were some very articulate statements about how one approaches the root causes. We have to deny safe haven, disrupt the flow of foreign fighters, block access to financing, and expose the lies that terrorist groups propagate. And that is particularly challenging in this world of constant media, constant access, 24/7, 365. We're living in a very different world, and terrorists have learned how to exploit that media in all kinds of ways. We also need to exert pressure in support of peace, perhaps one of the most important components of our responsibility. In places such as Libya, for instance, where instability feeds the kind of chaos and fear in which extremist organizations thrive. And we see that now with the presence of ISIL in Libya. So this is the fundamental strategy that we've laid out for countering violent extremism. We've adopted this strategy. We're strongly engaged in implementing it. We welcome the large number of nations that have joined as international actors in the Counter-ISIL Coalition and the Global Counterterrorism Forum and other regional organizations. But obviously, more needs to be done. We've been able to counter some foreign fighters and kept them from traveling, but still too many have been able to travel and still been able to reach the destination. We've been able to slow down and stop some elements of the financing, but still there's too much money that still is able to reach terrorist activities and actors. So our goal is to take urgent actions against immediate threats while also facing up to longer-term measures that prevent the recruitment of future generations of terrorists and improve governance and enhance economic opportunities so that radicalization is less likely. This is an enormous challenge for all of us. We know it. There are countless countries where, 60, 65% of the population in some cases are under the age of 30, under the age of 25 in vast majority, under the age of 18 in majority in many countries. And unless they find opportunity and options, their minds will be stolen, their opportunity.
All right, everybody, we are getting ready to sign out here. It's been a great evening with you. Thank you all so much for being part of this live stream with me. We started at 6:30. We even started a little bit earlier at 5:15 with some breaking news situation, a police chase. We did cover that, and I do have an update for you if you've been watching. With the police chase, there is now 2 people in custody, now just 1 person outstanding in that police chase, and the outstanding person was the driver. So police are still continuing that investigation, and we should have more for you on Monday when the next News Now stream begins. But it's been a great evening. We shared a lot of good thoughts with everybody. I'd like to thank the community once again, the News Now community, for making this one great chat room. If it wasn't for you guys, we wouldn't be doing this because we wouldn't have anybody to talk to and provide the news. So everyone, please have a safe and very happy weekend, and remember to hug those around you. You got to embrace every moment. Appreciate it. We'll see you on Monday. Samia will be kicking us off. See you tomorrow. And I mean Monday. See you guys.